Sweetheart, in this town, my badge is the only law that walks. You hear me, sweetheart? I asked you a question.
Unit 4, go ahead.
Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Subject non-compliant. Subject refusing to identify. Requesting a second unit at Vine and Amber.
His partner stood 2 paces behind, younger, field-trained by the older man himself.
Camera's a little tight. Let me fix that.
He lifted the body cam clipped to his chest, adjusted the strap, and gave the harness a gentle tug. The lens tilted about 11 degrees to the west. The frame that would later be pulled from the department server would show a beautiful shot of a red mailbox and a strip of blue sky. It would not show Hazel Ridgway. It would not show a hand reaching for the strap of her tote.
Let me help you with that bag, ma'am.
Hands behind your back for me, sweetheart. That's it. Nice and easy.
If a story about a badge that thinks it is the law hits somewhere close to home, tap that like button before we go any further. There is a long way to go.
2 days earlier, Hazel had made the drive from Cleveland at 4 in the morning. She always drove at 4. The interstate was empty at that hour, and she could think. The passenger seat held 2 boxes of her mother's medical records, a hanging garment bag with 2 of her mother's favorite Sunday dresses, and a single folder in matte black with no label on the front and a small gold seal on the back. She did not open the folder. She had not opened it in 6 months. She had signed the last document inside it in March and had not read anything else that mattered since then. Milbrook, Ohio was one of those Rust Belt towns that had once made washing machines and had learned to make traffic tickets instead. Population 31,000, median household income falling, municipal court docket rising. The courthouse squatted on the corner of Main and Grove like a squat old animal that no one had bothered to feed. The police station sat 1 block south, sharing a parking lot with the tax office. A tall man in Milbrook could stand in the middle of that lot and touch 3 branches of government without stretching his arms. Hazel's mother lived in a 2-story clapboard house on Ivy Lane, 3 blocks from Vine Street. Doris Ridgway was 78 years old, had 1 working lung, and had raised 3 children in that house on a schoolteacher's salary. This week, Doris was moving into an assisted living apartment across town. Hazel was here to help pack a life into 40 boxes. Doris was in the kitchen when Hazel came through the door. She had made coffee. She always made coffee. She had also laid out 3 of Hazel's father's old cardigans on the kitchen chair, folded flat. "You take one, Hazel. He would have wanted you to." Hazel picked up the gray one and folded it a second time. She folded it the way she had been taught. Sleeves in, hem straight, corners square. She placed it on top of her overnight bag without looking down. Her mother watched her fold it and said nothing. Her mother had been watching her fold things for 4 decades now, and had learned over time when not to speak. They went to the pharmacy that afternoon. The clerk behind the counter had known Doris for 15 years and still asked to see Hazel's ID twice before releasing her mother's inhaler. He held the plastic card under a small ultraviolet lamp for 4 seconds longer than was necessary. Hazel did not react. She thanked him. She put the inhaler in the paper bag and folded the top down. Across the street at Wexler Hardware, she asked for a specific brand of drawer liner, and the clerk pointed to aisle 3, and by the time she reached the end of aisle 3, the clerk was standing at the far end pretending to restock something that did not need restocking. She picked up 2 rolls of liner and walked to the register and paid in cash. Doris was on the porch swing when she got back to Ivy Lane. Reverend Naomi Prescott was sitting beside her with a casserole dish balanced on her knees. Reverend Prescott had been pastoring the second oldest congregation in Milbrook for 22 years and knew every household in the neighborhood by the sound of the screen door. "There you are, Miss Ridgway." Reverend Prescott did not call her Hazel. Reverend Prescott called everyone by their surname, always. It was a habit that had settled on her decades ago and had never come off. The three women ate on the porch. The Reverend talked about the weather, about the church roof, about the price of eggs. Then she talked about the traffic details on Vine Street. "They have been out there most mornings this month. They pull people over near the bus stop. It's the same 3 officers. They are polite the first 60 seconds, and then they are not." Doris nodded slowly at nothing in particular. Hazel filed that away. She did not answer. That night, she sat on the edge of her mother's guest bed and unfolded the matte black folder for the first time in 6 months. She read 3 pages. She closed the folder. She placed it inside the lining of her overnight bag, along the seam where a small brass zipper opened a hidden pocket. She zipped it shut. Then she checked the 2 windows in the guest room, and the door to the hallway, and the door to the porch, and the lock on the porch screen, in that order. She sat back down on the bed. Her hands did not shake. Tuesday morning at 9:05 a.m., she walked out the front door with the paper bag in her right hand and her mother's list in her left. The list said, "Pharmacy, produce, hardware, done." The list did not say cruiser.
The cruiser rolled up at her at the corner of Vine and Amber. It moved slowly, the way a fisherman lets a lure drift. The driver's window came down. Officer Blake Merritt leaned an elbow on the frame. "Ma'am, can I see some ID?" He did not phrase it as a question. He did not phrase it as an order either. He phrased it as a small courtesy that a woman who understood her position would already be reaching for. Hazel adjusted the paper bag against her hip. She did not reach for anything. "Officer, could I ask what the stop is for?" Her voice was calm and level and pitched exactly right for the middle distance between them. She was not loud. She was not soft. She was auditable. He smiled. He turned his head slightly toward Corliss, who had gotten out of the cruiser and was standing near the front bumper, adjusting the strap of his bodycam. "I'd like to note the time," she said. She said it the way you say the temperature, neutral, factual, time-stamped. Corliss glanced up at Merritt. Merritt did not look at Corliss. Merritt looked at Hazel, and his smile got a little wider. "That is an interesting phrase, ma'am. Do you talk like this often?" Hazel did not answer that. She looked past him at the small metal placard bolted to the light pole above his cruiser. The placard read, in white capital letters, "Public sidewalk, no loitering statute applicable." There was a smaller line beneath it that said City of Milbrook Ordinance, followed by a number. She read the sign. She looked back at Merritt. "I am on a public sidewalk. I am walking to the pharmacy. I have not committed a violation. Am I being detained?" He got out of the cruiser. He shut the door behind him with his hip. "You're being asked to identify yourself, ma'am. That is all." "On what basis, officer?" He took one step toward her. Corliss adjusted the body cam again. The lens tilted west again. The red mailbox got its second cameo of the morning. Hazel Ridgway did not resist. She lifted her left wrist herself. She looked at Corliss, and she said in the same flat, auditable voice, "Officer, please make sure your camera is aimed at me. Please." Corliss did not move the camera. He looked away. Merritt walked her toward the cruiser. As they passed the light pole, she looked up at the sign one more time. She read the ordinance number in her head. She read the statute number in her head. She matched them against each other. They did not match. He opened the back door of the cruiser and rested a hand on the top of her head. "Watch your step, sweetheart. You going for a ride." The Milbrook Police Department booking room smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. The fluorescent tube over the intake desk buzzed at a pitch that was slightly wrong. There were 4 people already in the queue when Merritt walked Hazel through the security door. Two of them were young men in work uniforms. One was a woman in a housekeeping smock. The fourth was a teenager who was crying quietly into his sleeve. The woman at the intake desk was Sergeant Claudette Vermeer. She had been the public affairs sergeant at Milbrook PD for 6 years. Her uniform was pressed. Her lipstick was fresh. There was a phone in her left hand and a printed press draft in her right. She looked up when Merritt walked in, and she smiled the way a woman smiles at a joke she is about to tell. "Blake, let me get her processed first. This one is for the highlight reel." She said it in a voice that traveled. It reached the 4 people in the queue. It reached the teenager. It reached Hazel. Vermeer waved her forward, past the 2 young men, past the woman in the smock, past the teenager. She placed Hazel in front of the intake camera and adjusted the tripod herself, 3 inches to the left, 1 inch up.
Chin down a little, ma'am. There we go. The camera fired. Vermeer looked at the small preview screen. She smiled again. That is a keeper. She sat back down at her desk and picked up the press draft. "Blake, I have you down for a textbook stop of a suspicious individual near a school zone, 9 a.m., Vine and Amber. Suspect resisted identification and became verbally aggressive. Officer showed restraint. That sound right?" There was no school within 4 blocks of Vine and Amber. The nearest school was Grove Elementary, 6 blocks north. The nearest bus stop was for the county senior center. Hazel had passed the school zone sign for Grove on her drive-in on Sunday. She had noted where it was. She noted it again now. Merritt nodded at the desk. "That sounds right." Vermeer typed. Her acrylic nails made small clicking sounds on the keyboard. The clock on the wall behind her read 9:52 a.m. Hazel filed that timestamp too. Vermeer took her fingerprints herself. She did it slowly, 1 finger at a time, pressing each one down onto the electronic scanner with a small, firm push. She kept talking while she did it. "You know, ma'am, most people who come through here, they get it right away. They understand. They are quiet, and they are polite, and they get out fast. You do not have to make things difficult." Hazel said nothing. "Nothing at all to say. Interesting." Vermeer took the last print. She wiped her hands on a small cloth. She looked up. "You will be in a holding cell for a few hours. The magistrate does arraignments at 1:30 p.m. If you have a lawyer you can call, this is the time." "I do not need one right now, thank you." Vermeer laughed once, short, not warm. "Ma'am, everyone needs one right now." They took her belt. They took her shoelaces. They took the paper bag with the inhaler receipt and the pill organizer that held her mother's blood pressure medication. They did not take her cardigan. She had folded it flat over her forearm on the walk from the cruiser, and she folded it flat again when they placed her belongings in the plastic bin. They did take her matte black folder. It went into a large evidence envelope and was sealed with a red sticker. Vermeer watched Vermeer write "property of defendant" on the outside in black marker. Vermeer did not look inside. The holding cell was a rectangular concrete room with a metal bench along one wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. There were 3 other women already inside. One of them was asleep on the bench. One was crying softly in the far corner. The third woman was standing at the bars with her arms crossed, watching everything. That third woman was in her 40s. Her name, Hazel would learn later, was Tabitha. She had been arrested the previous Thursday. "You get pulled off the sidewalk?" Hazel nodded once. "Vine Street." Hazel nodded again. Tabitha exhaled through her nose. She did not laugh. She looked past Hazel at the concrete wall. "March. They pulled me at the same corner. My car was in the impound lot by lunch. 2 weeks later, I got the notice. They sold it at auction under the forfeiture statute. Blue Toyota, paid for, 10 years old. They said it was suspected in a drug offense. There was no drug offense." She said all of this without heat, the way a woman says a thing she has said many times inside her own head. "You are not the first, ma'am. You will not be the last." The woman crying in the corner made a small sound. The woman on the bench did not stir.
Hazel walked to the bench and sat down at the far end. She did not lean back. She folded her cardigan and placed it on the metal beside her. She placed her hands on her knees. At approximately 11:20 a.m., a fight broke out on the men's side of the holding wing. Hazel could hear it through the wall. 2 voices raised, a body against a door, a guard shouting. Then a second fight in the women's wing itself, at the far end of the corridor, 2 cells down. The intake officer, a man in his 50s named Ronan Wexler, came out of the security office in a hurry. He was alone. His radio was in his hand. His face was tight. Hazel stood up and walked to the bars of her cell. "Officer Wexler, may I speak?" He glanced at her, surprised at his own name. She had read it off his tag during intake and had not forgotten it. "Ma'am, not now." "You are alone. Your protocols call for 2 intake officers on the floor during a multi-cell incident. If you place me in view of the corridor camera and open the cell of the woman 2 doors down, I can talk her back to the bench without anyone getting near her. She is escalating because she cannot see anyone. She is not violent. She is scared." Wexler stared at her. He did not open her cell. He did not open the other cell either, but he did walk down the corridor, and he stood in the woman's line of sight, and he lowered his voice, and he used a phrase that Hazel had said out loud to him a moment before. He used it word for word. The woman stopped shouting within 30 seconds. Wexler came back past Hazel's cell on his way to the security office. He slowed. He did not stop. He looked at her once, at her folded hands, and her folded cardigan, and her flat, auditable calm, and he kept walking. 10 minutes later, the door to her cell opened, and she was moved to a single cell at the end of the corridor. It was quieter there. It was also directly under the corridor camera. Nobody explained why she had been moved. Before the next twist lands, tap subscribe. This is the kind of story you will want the ending of, and there is more still coming. The Milbrook Municipal Court arraignment docket ran on the half hour, and at 1:30 p.m., the bailiff called 42 names in a voice that once was a barker at a state fair. He was good at it. He did the whole docket in 9 minutes flat. The last name he called was Ridgway, Hazel. She walked to the defendant's podium in the same flats she had put on at 7 that morning. Her cardigan was folded over her forearm. Her hands were empty. At the prosecution table sat Cassian Whitcomb, assistant city prosecutor for the city of Milbrook. He was 39 years old, wore a navy suit that was 2 years out of trim, and had a habit of tapping the edge of his manila folder against the table 3 times before he stood. He tapped it now. 3 times. He stood. "Your Honor, the city is filing 3 charges against the defendant. Ohio Revised Code 2921.31, obstructing official business. City Ordinance 613.02, disorderly conduct, and a resisting arrest charge under Ohio Revised Code 2921.33. The judge on the bench was Ambrose Hartwell. He had been the Milbrook Municipal Court judge for 22 years. He was 68, had a full head of white hair, and had a face that had spent 2 decades learning how to look bored. He looked bored now. He did not lift his eyes from the docket in front of him. "Defendant, do you have counsel?" "Not today, Your Honor." Now he did look up. He tilted his glasses down and looked over the top of them. "Ma'am, in my courtroom, women who play games get the maximum. If you represent yourself today, I promise you will regret it. That is not a threat. That is a professional courtesy. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Honor. May I be heard on a preliminary matter?" "You may not. Enter a plea." "Then I would like to read Ohio Revised Code 2921.45 into the record before I enter my plea." The room went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when a door opens somewhere it should not. The court reporter's fingers paused above her keyboard. Hartwell did not laugh out loud, but something in his mouth moved that would have been a laugh in a less formal room. 29-21-45. That is interference with civil rights under color of law. That is a charge against a public official. You are not a public official. You are a defendant, ma'am. I understand, Your Honor. I'm asking to read it into the record. Denied. Enter a plea. Then I would like to read it without your permission. She did not raise her voice. She simply began. No public servant, under color of his office, employment, or authority, shall knowingly deprive or conspire to or attempt to deprive any person of a constitutional or statutory right. She said it the way you recite the alphabet, word for word, no hesitation, no paper. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving entirely.
Ma'am, stop. She kept going. The Ohio Revised Code further provides that a violation of this section is a misdemeanor of the first degree, and if the offender's actions cause serious physical harm, a felony of the third degree. Ma'am, I said stop. Hartwell was leaning forward now. Whitcomb was still standing. Merritt had come in through the side door 2 minutes earlier and was leaning against the wood-paneled wall with his arms folded. The smirk on his face had not changed. Hazel stopped. Thank you, Your Honor. Hartwell stared at her for a long 3 seconds. He seemed to be recalibrating something behind his eyes. Ma'am, I have been on this bench for 22 years. I have heard every recitation trick, every jailhouse lawyer, every self-taught defendant. That was a nice performance. It does not change the charges you are facing. Enter a plea. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Trial date is set for October 11th at 9 a.m. Bond is set at $15,000 cash. You may sit down. Your Honor, one further preliminary matter. No. Under Ohio Code of Judicial Conduct, Rule 2.11, Paragraph A, Subsection 3, a judge shall disqualify him or herself in any proceeding in which the judge knows that a lawyer with whom the judge has a familial relationship is acting as counsel of record. The court reporter's fingers were no longer near the keyboard. They were folded in her lap. Hartwell blinked once. Ma'am, Assistant Prosecutor Whitcomb is your son-in-law, Your Honor. His wedding announcement ran in the Milbrook Gazette in June of last year, page 4. Now the room was very, very quiet. Whitcomb's manila folder made a soft sound as it slid 2 inches on the table. Vermeer, who had come in with Merritt, looked at the back of Merritt's head. Merritt had unfolded his arms. Hartwell stared at Hazel Ridgway. Hazel Ridgway stared back. At that moment, across the room, at the clerk's counter in the back left corner, a woman named Elowen Fenwick was running the day's defendant intake through the Ohio Law Enforcement Gateway. She was a temporary court clerk. She had been on the job for 6 weeks. She had typed Hazel's name and date of birth into the system and hit Enter. The screen returned 3 lines. The first line was Hazel's date of birth. The second line was the notation Federal System Match. The third line was a small red flag icon and a phone number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Elowen Fenwick stopped breathing for 2 seconds. She looked up at the bench. She looked at Judge Hartwell. She looked at Whitcomb. She looked at the bailiff. She did not speak. She wrote a note on a small square of yellow paper. She folded it once. She stood up from her chair very carefully, as if the floor were made of glass, and she walked around the counter and down the side aisle to the bailiff's post. She placed the note in his hand. The bailiff read it. He blinked. He read it again. He did not hand it up to Judge Hartwell. He put it in the breast pocket of his uniform shirt. He looked at Hazel Ridgway. Hazel Ridgway did not look at him. She was looking at Ambrose Hartwell. She was waiting for him to answer her motion. Hartwell was not answering her motion. He was staring at his own docket. He was not reading it. He was staring at it the way a man stares at a piece of paper when he is trying very hard to think of something else.
Ma'am, we will address that motion in written form. Please file it with the clerk by end of business tomorrow. Bond stands at $15,000. Court is adjourned for the day." He hit the gavel once. He was off the bench before the sound stopped ringing. Whitcomb scooped up his manila folder without looking at anyone. Merritt straightened off the wall and walked out through the side door. Vermeer followed him without a word. The court reporter finally closed her machine. The bailiff stood at his post with the small folded yellow note still in his breast pocket. He watched Hazel Ridgway walk back down the center aisle in her flats, her cardigan folded over her forearm, her hands empty. He watched her all the way to the back door. Then he took the note out of his pocket. He read it a third time, and a fourth. If you are still with us at this point, do us one small favor. Tap like, hit subscribe, and stay right here. Tomorrow morning, in this same courtroom, someone is going to open a folder, and Ambrose Hartwell is not going to be the one holding the gavel.
At 6:14 p.m. that same evening, in a converted brownstone on East 9th Street in downtown Cleveland, a phone rang on the 3rd floor. It was a landline. It sat on a desk that had a small brass plate on the front. The plate said, "Deputy United States Attorney." The man behind the desk was Solomon Reeve. He picked it up on the second ring. He listened for 40 seconds. He did not say anything for the first 20. On the 21st, he said, "She read the statute," and on the 40th, he said, "I am leaving now." He hung up. He stood. He put on the jacket that had been draped over the back of his chair. From the bottom drawer of the desk, he took a slim brown folder with 2 red tabs on the side. He locked the drawer. He walked down the hall to the office at the end, and he knocked once on the frame, and he said, "We have a problem in Milbrook. I need an FBI evidence tech on the road by 7 p.m. At 11:47 p.m., Solomon Reeve pulled a black government sedan into the parking lot of Milbrook Municipal Court. The building was dark except for one window on the 2nd floor. Behind him, a second car pulled in. A woman in a dark windbreaker got out of the second car carrying a hard-sided case. Her badge, when she clipped it to the outside of the windbreaker, said FBI Evidence Response. They walked around to the side entrance. A man was waiting for them at the door. The man was Special Agent Amos Kirkland, Special Agent in charge of the FBI Cleveland Field Office. He had driven up separately. He did not shake Solomon's hand. He held the door open. The 3 of them walked to the clerk's office in the back left corner of the empty courtroom, and Elowen Fenwick, the temporary clerk, let them in with a key that was shaking slightly in her hand. She had waited for them. She had not gone home. She pulled up the Ohio Law Enforcement Gateway on her terminal. She typed the name and the date of birth. The screen returned the same 3 lines it had returned that afternoon. Solomon Reeve read them. He read them once. He nodded. He said, "Thank you, ma'am. You did the right thing." And then he turned to the evidence tech and he said, "We need the bodycam files, the dispatch audio, the intake video, and the press draft on the sergeant's terminal. Chain of custody starts now." The evidence tech opened the hard-sided case. By 7:20 a.m. the next morning, the following items had been pulled from the Milbrook Police Department server and logged into Federal Evidence Intake Receipt number 24-0417. Item 1 was bodycam file M-4471, worn by Officer Jasper Corliss. The file was 14 minutes and 11 seconds long. Between the timestamp of 9:13 a.m. and 58 seconds and the timestamp of 9:14 a.m. and 22 seconds, the audio track was intact, but the video track showed a red mailbox and a strip of blue sky. The metadata field for that 24-second window contained the phrase, "camera muted per officer discretion." There was no such setting in the Milbrook PD bodycam manual. The setting did not exist. Item 2 was the dispatch audio for Unit 4 on the morning of the arrest. The keying timestamp on the transmission was 9:14 a.m. and 22 seconds. Officer Merritt was recorded stating that the subject was non-compliant and refusing to identify.
According to the intake video pulled from the pharmacy security camera 2 doors down at Vine and Amber, Hazel Ridgway had not spoken a single audible word to Officer Merritt at the time the radio was keyed.
Item 3 was a document titled MPD Press Release Draft, saved to Sergeant Vermeer's departmental email folder. The subject line was, "Textbook Stop, Vine and Amber." The document described a suspicious individual near a school zone, the officer's restraint, and the subject's verbal aggression. The document was time-stamped at 8:52 a.m. The arrest occurred at 9:14 a.m. and 22 seconds. The press draft predated the arrest by 41 minutes and 22 seconds. Item 4 was a closed complaint file, number MPD-2024-116. The complainant was a parishioner at Reverend Naomi Prescott's church. She had been stopped on Vine Street the previous February. Her car had been impounded and later sold at civil forfeiture auction. The complaint had been sustained by an internal reviewer and then 3 weeks later quietly closed. The closure had been signed by Sergeant Claudette Vermeer. Item 5 was a spreadsheet from the Office of the Ohio Auditor of State. The spreadsheet tracked civil forfeiture revenue in every municipality in the northern half of the state. The Milbrook line had risen 340% over the previous 3 fiscal years. It was the highest per capita figure on the sheet. The evidence tech printed 6 copies of each item. She placed them in 6 matching brown folders. Solomon Reeve took 1. Kirkland took 1. 4 went into a locked bag for the grand jury. At 6:30 that same morning, at the county holding facility, an intake officer named Ronan Wexler stood outside Hazel Ridgway's single cell with a paper cup of coffee in his hand. He did not open the door. He did not slide anything through the slot. He set the paper cup on the floor near the bars. He did not look at her. "Would you like this, Miss Ridgway?" He did not call her ma'am. He did not call her defendant. He said Miss Ridgway. That was it. "Thank you, officer." He walked away. He was still walking away when the door at the far end of the corridor opened and Solomon Reeve walked in, and behind Solomon walked Amos Kirkland, and behind Kirkland walked the evidence tech. Solomon stopped at Hazel's cell. "Good morning, U.S. Attorney." "Good morning, Solomon." He handed one of the brown folders through the slot in the bars. She opened it. She read the first page. She closed it. She handed the folder back through the slot. She said, "This is enough." Then she said, "Get me out of here in time for the 9 a.m. docket." At 8:52 a.m., the bond payment was posted at the clerk's counter by Deputy United States Attorney Solomon Reeve. He posted it in cash. Eloan Fenwick, working the counter for the second morning in a row, did not blink. She stamped the release form and slid it back through the window and said, "You are free to go, ma'am." At 9:02 a.m., the Milbrook Municipal Court came to order. Judge Ambrose Hartwell took the bench in the same robe he had worn the day before. The bailiff, who had put the small yellow note in his breast pocket the previous afternoon, was at his post. The note was no longer in the pocket. It was in the drawer at his feet, folded in half again, waiting. Assistant Prosecutor Cassian Whitcomb sat at the prosecution table with a manila folder and a fresh cup of coffee. He tapped the folder 3 times. He stood. "Your Honor, the city is prepared to proceed on the matter of State of Ohio versus Ridgway, case number 24-M-0917. Hartwell nodded. He looked at the back of the courtroom. He froze. Hazel Ridgway was walking down the center aisle in the same flats she had worn the day before. She was not wearing the gray cardigan. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a plain white shirt. 2 steps behind her walked Solomon Reeve in a dark suit, carrying the slim brown folder. 2 steps behind Solomon walked a woman in a dark windbreaker with a badge on her chest that said FBI. 2 steps behind her walked Special Agent Amos Kirkland. They walked in single file down the aisle. Hazel took the defendant's podium. Solomon Reeve stood beside her at the podium. He set the brown folder on the wood.
Whitcomb was still standing. His mouth was open slightly. Hazel spoke first. "Your Honor, before the city proceeds, I would like to enter an appearance on the record." Hartwell said nothing. Solomon Reeve opened the brown folder. He turned the first page around so that the seal on the top was facing the bench. He did not read from it. He passed it to Hazel. Hazel read from it.
Commission of the United States. Know ye that reposing special trust and confidence in the wisdom, uprightness, and learning of Hazel A. Ridgway of the state of Ohio, I do appoint her United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. Signed this 11th day of March by the President of the United States, confirmed by the Senate on the same date. She placed the page flat on the podium. Whitcomb sat down. He did not sit down cleanly. He sat down like a man whose knees had given him about a second and a half of warning. At the back of the courtroom, the side door opened, and Sergeant Claudette Vermeer walked in. She had come to watch. She was carrying her phone in her hand, and she had been intending to record the sentencing recommendation for the departmental highlight reel. She stopped 6 feet inside the door. At the door behind her, Officer Blake Merritt appeared. He had come with her. He did not walk in. Hazel did not turn around. "Your Honor, I have 3 motions." "Ma'am." She kept going. Motion 1. Under Ohio Code of Judicial Conduct, Rule 2.11, Paragraph A, Subsection 3, this court must recuse itself from any further proceedings involving cases prosecuted by Assistant Prosecutor Whitcomb, who is your son-in-law. That familial relationship is a matter of public record. It has been for 14 months. Motion 2. Under Rule 2.11, Paragraph A, Subsection 1, this court must further recuse itself from any proceeding in which the impartiality of the court might reasonably be questioned. On the record yesterday afternoon, you addressed the defendant with the phrase, "Women who play games get the maximum." That statement is being submitted to the Ohio Board of Professional Conduct as part of a complaint filed at 7 a.m. this morning. Motion 3. Under 28 United States Code, Section 535, the Department of Justice has opened a federal investigation into the Milbrook Police Department. Deputy United States Attorney Solomon Reeve is present. Special Agent in Charge Amos Kirkland of the FBI Cleveland Field Office is present. As of 9 a.m. this morning, all pending prosecutions arising from arrests by Officer Merritt or Officer Corliss are stayed pending federal review. She paused. She looked up at Hartwell. "Your Honor, this is not a threat. This is a professional courtesy." Hartwell said nothing for a full 6 seconds. Then he said, "Ma'am, I need to consult with my clerk." Hazel did not sit down. "Your Honor, one more thing." She lifted the brown folder. She held it against her chest. "I outrank this." Ambrose Hartwell recused from the bench at 9:11 a.m. He signed a written recusal order at 9:22. He did not preside over another Milbrook docket after that morning. He announced his retirement in a written statement to the Milbrook Gazette 3 weeks later. The statement cited his health. Cassian Whitcomb was placed on administrative leave by the city of Milbrook at 10 a.m. the same day. His departmental email access was suspended at 10:15. He submitted his resignation 2 weeks later on advice of counsel. He had retained a lawyer named on the private bar. He did not speak to the Gazette. Officer Blake Merritt was walked out of the courtroom by Special Agent Kirkland at 9:34 a.m. He was not cuffed. He was served a federal grand jury subpoena on the courthouse steps. His departmental firearm was collected and inventoried at 11 a.m. He was placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation. That was standard. He kept his health insurance. He kept his pension accrual. He also kept a lawyer, hired within 24 hours, funded by the local police union.
Officer Jasper Corliss came in voluntarily at 4 p.m. that afternoon and requested to speak with federal investigators. He came in with counsel. His counsel spoke first and long and made no promises, but by the end of the second interview, Corliss was cooperating. Sergeant Claudette Vermeer did not come in voluntarily. Her home was visited on the third day. Her departmental computer was imaged on the fifth. The press draft from the drafts folder was one of 41 drafts recovered from her account, 22 of which predated their respective arrests by more than 30 minutes. Her union lawyer began negotiating on the 14th day. The federal grand jury for the Northern District of Ohio was impaneled 6 weeks later. It sat for 4 months.
At the 4-month mark, the following indictments came down. Cassian Whitcomb, under Title 18 United States Code, Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights. Officer Blake Merritt, under Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law, and under Section 1512, Tampering with Evidence, for the bodycam metadata. Officer Jasper Corliss, under Section 242, plea deal noted. The state of Ohio also filed charges. Under Ohio Revised Code 2921.45, Interference with Civil Rights, filed by the Ohio Attorney General's Office against Merritt and Corliss. Under Ohio Revised Code 291314, Tampering with Records, against Sergeant Vermeer. At the 6th-month mark, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal pattern or practice investigation of the Milbrook Police Department under Title 34 United States Code, Section 12601. A federal monitor was proposed. The City Council held a public hearing on the proposal. The vote to accept the monitor passed 5-4. The funding vote to actually pay for the monitor was tabled to the next fiscal year. That was the shape of the justice cascade. It was partial. It was slow. It was, in the words of Reverend Naomi Prescott, more than they had ever gotten before and less than they had earned. If you have made it this far, hit like, hit subscribe, and stay for the last piece. There is one thread that did not get tied.
14 months after the morning on Vine Street, Hazel Ridgway drove her mother to the Ivy Lane house to the assisted living apartment across town for the last time. Doris had been ready to move for a year, but the trial had come first, and the trial had needed her daughter, and her daughter had needed the house to stay familiar. Now the trial was in recess. Now they could move. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a red brick building with a small courtyard. It had 2 windows that faced east and a small kitchen and a bathroom with a walk-in shower. Reverend Prescott had come over to help unpack. She had also brought a casserole. She always brought a casserole. The 3 of them sat on the small balcony that afternoon. Doris held her inhaler in her lap. Reverend Prescott had her hands folded around a coffee mug. Hazel sat with her feet up on the low railing. The Reverend said, "My parishioner got her settlement check last week, $18,000 and change. It will not buy her back the car she paid off, but she says it is something." Hazel nodded once. The Reverend said, "The 2nd unit at Vine and Amber has been reassigned. There are still traffic details on that corner, but the officers rotate now. And there is a body camera audit position that has been posted. It has not been filled." Hazel nodded once more. The Reverend did not push. At 6:20 p.m., Hazel's phone lit up on the small table beside her. She looked at the name on the screen. She answered it. Solomon? She listened. She listened for a long time. When she hung up, Doris looked at her. Doris did not ask. Hazel said, "They pulled a redacted email chain off the Milbrook PD server this afternoon. It was in an archive folder that had been marked for deletion last spring and did not get deleted. It is between Sergeant Vermeer and someone whose name is redacted in the received copy. The subject line references, quote, the arrangement with CC. Reverend Prescott set her mug down. Hazel said, Vermeer has already entered her plea. Whitcomb has resigned. Merritt is on retrial. Corliss is cooperating. Hartwell has retired. CC is not any of them. The Reverend said, and the initials do not match anyone the FBI has yet interviewed. They do not. Solomon says the Ohio auditor also flagged one forfeiture line item this morning that has the recipient field scrubbed, not blank, scrubbed. It has been overwritten with a null value in the source database. That takes a login above the sergeant level. The Reverend was quiet for a long moment. She said, You missed one. Hazel said, We did. Doris looked out over the courtyard. She said, Then you will find him. That night, Hazel drove back to Ivy Lane one last time. She was picking up the last 2 boxes. The house was empty. Her footsteps sounded loud on the hardwood floor. The kitchen chair where her father's cardigans had been folded flat was in the corner of the kitchen with a tag on it that said "Free" in her mother's handwriting. There was an envelope on the front porch. It was tucked under the corner of the doormat. It was a plain white envelope. There was no return address. The postmark said Milbrook. The stamp had been canceled at the branch post office on Grove Street 2 days earlier. She picked it up. She opened it in the empty kitchen, standing near the tagged chair under a bare bulb that had been left burning by the last person to leave. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. There was one sentence on it, typed, no signature, no letterhead. You missed one. She read it once. She read it twice. She did not throw it out. She folded it back the way it had come. She placed it in the inside pocket of her charcoal blazer. She turned off the bulb. She locked the front door behind her. The next morning at 7 a.m., she walked into her office on the 3rd floor of the brownstone on East 9th Street. Solomon was already at his desk. She did not sit down. She said, Open a new file. Mark it Milbrook ongoing. Cross-reference it to case 24-0417. Restrict access to you, me, and Kirkland. Solomon said, And the label? She said, Mark it open. She placed the folded letter on his desk. She walked to her own office at the end of the hall. She sat down. She looked out the window at the lake. It was gray that morning. She had a 9 a.m. meeting. She had a 10:30 meeting. She had a 12 o'clock lunch with the head of the Civil Rights Division that had been on her calendar for 6 weeks. At 8:58 a.m., she opened the top drawer of her desk and she took out the matte black folder with the small gold seal on the back. She placed it on the desk in front of her. She did not open it. She placed one hand flat on top of it. She looked at the lake. Somewhere in Milbrook, a person whose initials were not Whitcomb, not Vermeer, not Merritt, not Corliss, not Hartwell, was sitting down to a cup of coffee and reading the Gazette and turning the page. Hazel Ridgway would find him. But not today. Today, she had a 9 a.m. meeting. She lifted her hand off the folder. She stood. She went to work.